Hi, my name's Molly. I'm from the Northern Rhode Island Conservation District, and I'm going to be using the Enviroscape Watershed Model to discuss what watersheds are and what non-point source pollution is. So if you look at my model here, you'll see some gently sloping hills, you'll see some streams, and it all leads down to our reservoir right here. But this reservoir could represent any type of surface water body. Surface water being all of the water that we see on the surface of the earth. All of our lakes, reservoirs, oceans, any water that we see is considered surface water. This model does a really great job demonstrating how surface water moves and how it can carry pollution with it, but I should note that it doesn't really demonstrate the other side of the equation, which is groundwater. We'll use another model to demonstrate groundwater in my next video. So wherever you go on Earth, you are in a watershed. And what a watershed basically consists of is all of the hills, valleys, and land that will catch water and allow it to flow down to a lower point after it rains. So what you will see located in our watershed is we have a farm right here. Our farmer seems to be growing some crops as well as raising some animals. We have our water body, which has some boats for recreation or fishing, as well as some geese. We have some roads and bridges that cross the watershed area. And we also have a growing housing development. So we have a nice suburban neighborhood, and we also have some construction going on in the neighborhood, something we're actually seeing a lot of in our state right now. As development continues, as more and more houses are built. We have a factory right here. We do have some factories throughout Rhode Island. Now, all of the things going on in our watershed are what we call the land use of the watershed. Land use is a term you'll hear in a lot of different disciplines within environmental science, and when we're thinking about aquatics, we use the term because what goes on the land is going to have a big impact on the quality of our water. And that is because of the pollution that gets put out into the world from the various land use activities we have. Now, there are two main types of pollution. The first we call point source pollution. Point source pollution is when a lot of pollution comes from one specific place and goes right into our waterways. What we can use to represent point source pollution on this model is our factory. Lots of the things that regular people do every day in their lives lead to pollution ending up on the ground. Now, pollution that comes from these small sources, tiny amounts that add up to make a big difference, we call non-point source pollution. And non-point source pollution is what I'll be talking about for the rest of this video. Non-point source pollution is not something we can point to and say, hey, it's coming from that factory, or hey, it's coming from that oil spill, because it's coming from lots of small things we do every day around our homes and communities. One source of non-point source pollution is construction. You notice here, our construction trucks have dug up all the vegetation, so we have exposed soil. I'm going to use pepper to represent exposed soil on the construction site. We have, as we do in many towns in our state right now, we have a resident keeping some backyard chickens. Chickens make a mess. Use coffee grounds to represent that. We have septic systems. Now, septic systems do a very good job getting water clean when they are functioning properly. When they do not function properly, however, they can back up. You can have untreated wastewater end up in your backyard. We'll have some of that right there. We also have lawn and garden chemicals. If you're in a neighborhood where people like to have very green yards, or if you like to say golf at a golf course or anything like that, a lot of chemicals go into that process. Many to most, in some cases all, homeowners are using more than they actually need. And lawns, among other plants, are something that requires a very high input of nutrients to stay green and healthy versus something like native wildflowers. And finally, of course, with our harsh winters around here, we need to put a lot of road salt down on the roads. So headed down the road here, we have roadways crossing our town, so that's going to lead to a lot more road salt. And that's also going to lead to oil and gasoline leaking out of cars, trucks, and other vehicles. Next, we're going to talk about the farm. And before I delve into the farm, I want to make clear that what I am about to describe in terms of pollution that can come from a farm is a worst case scenario. Many farmers around the country, and I like to think especially here in Rhode Island, are extremely good stewards of their land. They do the absolute most that they can to minimize environmental impact. And through the Envirothon program, you're going to talk to many people who are working directly with farmers to help do that. For most farmers, growing food is a business, so they don't want to use more fertilizer than they have to because it's very expensive when you're talking about the large scale. However, we're going to pretend we have perhaps a newer farmer here who is not plugged into all the great resources out there yet and is making some mistakes. So first of all, we have a field where nothing is planted. Most farmers will use cover crops on a field that they are not growing on in a given year to help hold the soil in place. We might have some loose soil here because this farmer did not do that. We can have oil and gas from our farm equipment. We can have fertilizer and pesticides that perhaps were applied incorrectly or more than was actually needed was applied. And you see we have quite a few animals here. Management of waste from farm animals is a big deal. It's something that requires a lot of resources and knowledge. There are people who work at my office for whom their entire job is collecting, managing, and helping farmers safely compost or safely reuse their animals' waste. You'll notice that these animals are fenced right next to the water. They're not kept away from it at all. So those are some of the pollution sources we need to think about from the farm. And of course our geese here. And finally we can have oil and gas can leak out of boats as well as cars, which is one reason why boating is not allowed on the Situate Reservoir and many other drinking water reservoirs. So we have a lot of pollution that has ended up on the ground because of the land use that we have in this watershed. And now we're going to have to see what happens when it rains. Most rainstorms start out relatively light. You might not see a whole lot happening when there's only a little bit of a sprinkle. But as the rain picks up, some of the storms we've had this spring, you'll see the pollution on the ground really moves. Some is moving through this storm drain right here. Storm drains don't bring water anywhere for treatment, they just bring it away to prevent flooding. And now a whole lot of pollution has been carried downstream into our reservoir. So we have some pollution in there we can see. In this scenario, we can see the pet waste. If we had any trash, we would also have been able to see that move down. We can't see the road salt. We can't necessarily see the oil and gas, the chemicals that have made it into the reservoir, but they are there. They're there having an impact on the water.